They call this peace, but it feels more like a cage painted to look like the sky. The Athelian Compact, our self-appointed saviors, arrived a century ago not with warships, but with promises. They offered us stability, technology, and a place among the stars. And we, reeling from our own self-inflicted wounds, accepted. We traded our sovereignty for their gilded order. They gave us medicine that cured our plagues and neutered our ambition in the same stroke. They built gleaming citadels over our ruined cities, monuments to their benevolence that cast shadows long enough to swallow our history. And they taught us their language, a melodic, flowing tongue with no words for rebellion, for defiance, for rage. We were their problem children, a volatile species to be managed, pacified, and slowly diluted until the fire in our blood was nothing but a pilot light. They didn't conquer Earth, they curated it. My name is Kalen, and I remember the fire. I remember it because I saw it extinguished in my sister's eyes. Ilera was bright, not just smart, but alight with a curiosity that the Compact found distasteful, a spark of the old human chaos they worked so hard to stamp out. They called her a prodigy, a candidate for ascension. It was the highest honor they could bestow upon one of us, a process they described as a spiritual and intellectual uplifting, a chance to shed the limitations of our flesh and join their collective consciousness in a state of perfect harmony. My parents cried with pride the day the Athelian emissary, a being of flowing light and quiet condescension, came to our habitation block to take her. I was 16, and I knew, with the cold certainty of a grave, that I would never see my sister again. They brought her back a month later. She was serene. She was placid. She moved with a liquid grace that wasn't her own. And when she looked at me, her eyes were like polished stones, beautiful and empty. The fire was gone. They hadn't uplifted her. They had hollowed her out, leaving behind a perfect, placid shell that smiled when it was told and never asked a single question. That was the day I stopped believing in their peace and started learning the language they'd tried to make us forget. I became a rift runner, a smuggler who dances along the edges of their meticulously controlled hyperspace lanes. The Compact's FTL travel is clean, precise, and sterile. Like everything else about them, they ride stable currents, predictable and safe. We, the rats in their walls, use the rift's unstable, violent tears in space-time that can shear a ship in half if you miscalculate the resonance by a single decimal point. But the Athelians and their perfectly logical machines can't predict them, can't patrol them. In the chaos of the rifts, we found our freedom. It was in that chaos that we found our weapon. It wasn't a bomb or a fleet of warships. It was an echo. That's what we called it. A forbidden human science from before the Compact came. A technology born from desperation during the old unification wars. The Athelians called it a perversion, an abomination against the sanctity of a contained consciousness. To them, the soul and the machine were separate, one sacred, the other a tool. Our ancestors, however, saw a synergy. An echo drive doesn't just power a ship. It merges with the pilot. It's not a neural link. It's a psychic imprint, a complete fusion of mind and machine. The pilot doesn't fly the ship. They become it. They feel the strain on the hull as their own bones groaning, the roar of the engines as a second heart in their chest, the void of space as a presence on their skin. It's intoxicating. It's terrifying. And it gives a pilot the ability to react, to maneuver, to exist in ways the Athelians, with their rigid logic, could never comprehend. They confiscated and destroyed every echo core they could find, labeling the technology unstable, heretical. They were right. It is unstable. It leaves a mark on your soul, a permanent resonance with the machine that never truly fades. But it was ours. And now, we wanted it back. The job came from a man named Valerius, a former compact historian who had defected after discovering the truth about Ascension. He was the closest thing our scattered resistance network had to a leader, a whisper in the dark that connected the cells of smugglers, hackers, and saboteurs hiding in the Rust Belts, the massive, derelict orbital stations and asteroid colonies the Athelians had abandoned. He found me on Ganymede, in a bar where the air was thick with recycled oxygen and bitter regret. He offered me a job that was more than just smuggling spice or outlawed data chips. He wanted me to retrieve something they thought was lost forever, the original Echo Core, the very first one ever built. It was resting in the heart of the CNS Harbinger, a ghost ship, a pre-compact dreadnought that had vanished during the final battle of the Unification Wars, lost to a gravitational anomaly known as the Serpent's Maw. For 100 years, it had been a myth, a ghost story told by spacers. But Valerius's network had found it, caught in a decaying orbit around a neutron star, hidden within the nebula's violent energies. Getting there was suicide. The rifts near a neutron star were notoriously violent, and the nebula was a graveyard of ships. But the Harbinger wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol. It was the pinnacle of what we had been before the Compact arrived and told us we were lesser. It was a relic of our fire. I took the job. My ship, the Stray Dog, was an ugly thing. A patchwork freighter I'd rebuilt a dozen times with stolen parts and desperate ingenuity. But she was one of the few vessels left with the shielding and the structural integrity to even attempt a run through the maw. And I was one of the few pilots left with the nerve. My crew was Small Jacks, a mechanic whose hands were more machine than flesh, a grumpy genius who spoke in grunts and schematics, and Lena, a slicer who had escaped an Athelian re-education camp, her mind a razor-sharp weapon hidden behind a veil of quiet paranoia. They were broken, like me, and they were the only people in the universe I trusted. We plunged into the Serpent's Maw 4 days later. The rift was a maelstrom of screaming energy. The Stray Dog groaned around us, alarms blaring like banshees as gravity fluctuated wildly, threatening to tear us apart. I wasn't just piloting. I was wrestling with physics, my hands a blur on the controls, my mind racing to predict the unpredictable currents. For hours, we were tossed in the storm, blind and dead, with only our faith in the ship's integrity to keep us from becoming another smear of debris in the nebula. Then, silence. We emerged from the rift into an eerie calm, and there she was, the CNS Harbinger. She was magnificent and terrible, a cathedral of war forged from dark, pitted steel. She was 4 times the size of the Stray Dog, a jagged silhouette against the ethereal glow of the nebula. Her hull was scarred from a battle a century old, but she was intact, a sleeping titan. We docked, the clang of our magnetic clamps echoing in the profound silence. The inside was a tomb. The air was frigid, the corridors dark and coated in a thin layer of ice. Emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. We moved like ghosts through its halls, our boots crunching on frozen dust. Jack scanned the ship's systems. Power cores dead. Obviously. He grunted, his voice tight in our comms. But the primary conduits, they're intact. The whole damn thing's been preserved in a vacuum. It's perfect. Too perfect. A cold dread washed over me, the kind of instinct you learn to trust in the rifts. We weren't alone. Lena confirmed it a moment later, her voice a sharp whisper. I'm picking up an energy signature, faint, not from the ship. It's Athelian, a cloaking field. Kalen. They're here. The attack came without warning. There was no explosion, no hail of plasma fire, just a presence. A crushing weight descended on my mind, a psychic assault that felt like drowning in ice. My vision blurred, the corridor around me twisting into impossible shapes. Lena screamed, clutching her head. Jax crumpled to the deck, his cybernetic eye sparking. Through the pain, I saw it. A figure shimmered into existence at the far end of the hallway. It was an Athelian Justicar, one of their elite psychic enforcers. It wore no armor, only simple, flowing gray robes, but power radiated from it in palpable waves. Its face was a smooth, serene mask, but its mind was a weapon of pure, cold order, and it was methodically tearing ours apart. Your chaos ends here, primitive. Its voice wasn't spoken. It was injected directly into my skull. Calm and absolute. It considered us nothing more than a glitch, an error to be corrected. My pistol felt like a child's toy, but I raised it anyway, my hand shaking. The Justicar made a subtle gesture, and the weapon was torn from my grip, clattering uselessly down the hall. It took a step forward, and the psychic pressure intensified. I was dying. My mind was fraying, my memories unraveling. The image of Alara's empty eyes flashed before me, and a surge of pure, defiant hatred burned through the cold. It wasn't enough to fight back, but it was enough to think. The Echo Core. It was our only chance. Jax, I choked out, blood trickling from my nose. The core, primate now, Jax, barely conscious, crawled towards a nearby console, his metallic fingers fumbling to override the safeties. The Justicar turned its attention to him, and the pressure on my mind lessened for a fraction of a second. I scrambled back, deeper into the ship, towards the bridge, towards the command chair where the core was housed. It is a forbidden art, the Justicar's voice echoed in the corridor. A corruption. You will not desecrate this tomb with your flawed science. I stumbled onto the bridge. It was a vast, frozen cavern of dead screens and silent consoles. In the center was the pilot's throne, and integrated into its heart was the Echo Core, a sphere of milky, crystalline material that seemed to pulse with a faint, dormant light. The Justicar appeared in the doorway, Lena and Jax floating limply in a psychic grip behind it. It was toying with us. Your resistance is an illogical spasm, it projected, its voice dripping with pity. A final, meaningless convulsion before stillness. That's when I saw it. The pilot. He was still in the chair, a skeleton in a tattered flight suit, his skeletal hand still gripping the controls. A century he had sat here, a silent sentinel. And as I looked, I understood. The echo wasn't just a link. It was an imprint. The pilot's consciousness, his final moments of rage and defiance in a battle long lost, was still here, dormant, waiting. Jax had managed to bypass the safeties. A single green light blinked on the console next to the chair. The core was active, ready for an imprint. The Justicar raised its hand, a vortex of shimmering energy forming around it. It was done playing. There was no time. I didn't run. I dove. I threw myself into the pilot's throne, my hands closing over the frozen skeletons, my head slamming back into the headrest right over the glowing core. I closed my eyes and reached out with my mind, not with the practiced discipline of an Athelian, but with the raw, chaotic desperation of a human who refused to be caged. I didn't just ask for control. I screamed for it. I poured all of my hatred, my grief for Ilara, my burning resentment of their sterile peace into the core. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but absolute, mind-shattering pain. Then, two consciousnesses slammed together, mine and the ghost in the machine. 100 years of silent fury, of a warrior's final, defiant breath, crashed into my soul. I felt the ship's death. I felt the plasma burns on its hull as if they were searing my own skin. I felt the lives of its crew extinguished one by one. And I felt its rage. The Harbinger wasn't just a tomb. It was a vessel of pure, undiluted vengeance that had been waiting a century for a pilot. The lights on the bridge didn't flicker on. They exploded to life. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the deck, the sound of a sleeping god awakening. The Justicar stumbled back, its psychic control shattered as a wave of raw power. A fusion of man and ancient machine washed over it. I opened my eyes, but it wasn't just my eyes anymore. Through the viewport, I saw the nebula. Through 1,000 different sensors, I felt the gravitational pull of the neutron star. I felt the cold of the void and the dormant fire in the ship's weapon arrays. I was no longer Kalen. We were the Harbinger. And we were awake. The Justicar's serene mask finally cracked. Not with fear, but with utter disbelief. It was looking at an equation that did not compute, a variable that defied the elegant mathematics of its universe. The psychic force it wielded was precise, a scalpel designed to excise dissent from the cosmic consciousness. What it faced now was not a scalpel. It was a supernova, the ghost in my mind. The century-old fury of the Harbinger's last captain rose to meet the Athelian's assault. I felt her name bubble up from the deep Everostova. She wasn't just an echo, she was a co-pilot, her battle-honed instincts meshing with my raw, desperate rage. Let them see what a human soul is made of. Her thought was a blade of cold fire in my consciousness. The Athelian Justicar tried to reassert control, to cage the storm we had become. It sent a wave of pure order, a psychic command meant to pacify, to reduce us to manageable data. But it was trying to build a dam in a tsunami. We didn't block the attack. We absorbed it, and we showed it the truth it had tried to erase. I pushed my own memories into the torrent, the gray, hollow look in my sister Ilara's eyes, the sterile condescension of the emissary, the grit and grime of the Rust Belts, the exhilarating, terrifying chaos of a rift run. Rostova added her own ghosts to the flood, the thunder of the unification wars, the loyalty of her crew, the searing pain of their deaths, and the white-hot defiance of her final moments as she took the Harbinger into the maw rather than let it fall into enemy hands. It wasn't a battle of energy beams. It was a battle of truths. The Justicar's reality was one of placid harmony, of sanitized emotions and logical progression. We showed it the bloody, beautiful, horrific mess of human existence. We showed it love that was fierce enough to kill for, grief sharp enough to break worlds, and a capacity for hatred so profound it could lie dormant for 100 years and awaken with the force of a dying star. The Justicar recoiled, its mental form flickering, illogical, inefficient, corrupt. The words were not a sentence, but a system crash, the final sputtering of a machine fed an impossible paradox. It couldn't process a universe where pain was a source of strength, where rage was a catalyst for creation. It had come to extinguish a spark of chaos, and had instead found itself staring into an inferno. The ship's main reactor, a cold, dead heart a moment ago, began to thrum. I felt the fusion reaction igniting, not as a distant rumble, but as a sun blooming in my chest. Power surged through conduits like adrenaline through veins. On the bridge, the ancient consoles lit up, their screens flickering from crimson battle alerts to a steady, operational blue. The skeleton in the chair beside me, Rostova's last physical anchor, seemed to settle, its grim vigil finally over. I reached out with a fraction of my newfound consciousness and gently nudged the minds of my friends. Jax and Lena gasped, collapsing from their psychic tethers onto the frozen deck. Kaylin Lena's voice was a ragged whisper, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Jax pushed himself up, his cybernetic eye whirring as it tried to process the impossible. By the void, the core, it's stable. The energy readings they're not just off the charts, they're writing a new one. I turned our head, the ship's sensor arrays, now an extension of my own senses, focused on them. I could feel the rhythm of their heartbeats, the warmth of their bodies against the frigid metal. They were my crew, my anchor. I pulled my consciousness back from the brink, focusing it, containing the storm of Rostova's rage and the ship's immense power into something resembling my own identity. "I'm here," I said, and the voice that came out was mine, but deeper, resonant with the hum of the dreadnought's engines. I released the Justicar. It fell to the floor, its physical form still intact, but the mind within, gone. It didn't scream. The perfect, logical vessel of its mind simply shattered, leaving behind an empty shell no different from my sister. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Before we could process what had happened, a new alert flashed across the main view screen. A ship had just decloaked 1,000 kilometers off our bow. It was Athelion, a Vindicator-class patrol cutter, sleek and silver like a striking viper. It was the Justicar's ride home. They know. Rostova's thought was sharp and clear. They felt the core ignite. They will try to contain us. A transmission request chimed, polite and utterly oblivious to the reality of the situation. Unidentified vessel, you are in violation of compact quarantine. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Non-compliance will be met with precise and proportionate force. I almost laughed. It was like a zookeeper trying to discipline a leviathan. Proportionate force, I murmured. Show them, Rostova urged, her voice a predatory growl. I didn't need the encouragement. I felt the Harbinger's weapon systems, dormant for a century, cycle online. Heavy plasma cannons, magnetic accelerator turrets, and something else. Something darker that hummed in the ship's belly, a gravitational distortion projector, a weapon so brutal the compact had outlawed the very theory behind it. The Athelion ship fired first, a lance of brilliant blue energy designed to surgically disable our engines. I didn't need to give an order. I felt the threat, and the Harbinger reacted. The ship's kinetic barriers, powered by the newly awakened core, flared to life, absorbing the blast with barely a shimmer. The energy was shunted, redirected, and vented to the Athelians. It must have looked like we hadn't even been hit. Our turn. Rustova and I thought as one. I didn't target their engines or their weapons. I targeted their pride. I focused, and the magnetic accelerators on the dorsal spine roared. It wasn't a clean, precise energy beam. It was a salvo of white-hot molten slugs, each the size of a shuttle, a relic of a more brutal age of warfare. We threw a piece of our rage across the void. The Athelian ship's shields, designed to deflect focused energy, buckled under the sheer kinetic violence. The slugs hammered its hull, tearing through the elegant silver plating like it was paper. Alarms I could now hear across the Athelian comms channels turned from controlled alerts to raw, panicked shrieks. They had never seen anything like this. Their tactics were based on logic, on predictable outcomes. We were a fistfight in the middle of their chess game. The Vindicator tried to maneuver away, its movements quick and precise, but it felt sluggish, predictable. We were already there, anticipating its every move, not with predictive algorithms, but with the gut instinct of a predator. I felt a surge of power building deep within the Harbinger, the gravitational projector begging to be used. Rostova's rage wanted to unmake them, to crush their ship into a singularity. But a colder part of me, the part that was still Kalen, held back. We weren't murderers. Not yet. Instead, I brought the primary plasma cannons to bear. Two colossal streams of incandescent energy erupted from the Harbinger's forward batteries. And I didn't just fire them. I guided them. A painter using a sun as my brush. I sliced off the Vindicator's primary weapon arrays and its engine block with surgical brutality, leaving the life support section intact. The ship was castrated, left floating and helpless in the glow of the nebula. A final message, a warning. We turned, the massive dreadnought moving with a terrifying grace that defied its size, and pushed toward the nearest rift exit. Piloting was no longer a matter of controls and calculations. I saw the turbulent energies of the rift, not as a threat, but as a current, a river to be navigated. I simply willed the Harbinger forward, and the ship responded, plunging into the chaos, as if it were coming home. Lena was at her console, her hands flying across the holographic interface. Their networks are on fire, she breathed. They don't know what we are. They're cross-referencing ancient archives, pre-compact threat assessments. They think a ghost has returned. Tell Valerius we have the package, I said, my voice steady, though my heart, my original heart, was hammering against my ribs. And tell him we're bringing home a little something extra. We rode the rift for what felt like an eternity and a heartbeat all at once, emerging into the familiar, grimy space of the Rust Belts. Our destination was a hollowed-out asteroid known only as Haven, the largest and most secret of the resistance bases. As the colossal, war-scarred form of the Harbinger tore its way out of the rift, the usual chaotic chatter of the asteroid's traffic control went dead silent. Every smuggler, every miner, every dissident in a 100-kilometer radius stopped what they were doing and stared. A legend had just ripped its way back into reality. We docked in Haven's largest bay, a cavernous space that the Harbinger still dwarfed. When the ramp lowered, it was Valerius who met us, his usually calm, scholarly face pale with shock. He looked past us, at the impossible warship humming with restrained power behind us. The Echo Core, he began, his voice barely a whisper. "It works." Jax stepped forward, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "It more than works," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. Kalen didn't just activate it, he bonded with it. Valerius's eyes finally focused on me, and what he saw there made him take an involuntary step back. He wasn't looking at the smuggler he'd hired. He was looking at a living weapon, a fusion of flesh, steel, and a century of vengeance. We stood on the bridge of our new body, the three of us, watching the resistance fighters and mechanics swarm over the hull of the ancient dreadnought, their awe palpable even through the reinforced viewport. We had the sword. We had pulled it from the stone, but as I looked at our reflection in the dark, silent screen, I saw the truth. I saw the ghost in the machine, the mechanic with hands of steel, the slicer haunted by her past, and me, the pilot who had become both a key and a cage. The weight of what we had done, of what we had become, was just beginning to settle. And in the back of my mind, as clear and cold as the void between stars, I heard Ava Rostova's voice. Peace was the lie they told themselves. We are the truth they chose to forget. Now, the real war begins.
The silence of Haven was a different kind of silence than the tomb of the Harbinger. This was a living quiet, a breath held in collective awe and terror. As I walked down the ramp, every eye was on me. But I knew they weren't just seeing me. They were seeing the ghost standing behind me, a 4-kilometer-long shadow of war and retribution. Stepping onto the solid ground of the asteroid should have felt grounding, but it was profoundly disorienting. I could feel the cold, pitted steel of the docking bay floor through the soles of my boots, but I could also feel the silent, thrumming energy of the Harbinger's core half a kilometer away, as if it were my own heart. The ship was a phantom limb I hadn't yet learned to control, its senses bleeding into mine. I could hear the whispers of the mechanics through the station's comm frequencies and feel the subtle gravitational stresses on the dreadnought's hull simultaneously. I was in two places at once, a man and a monument, and the strain was making my vision swim. "They fear us." Rostova's voice was a cool, analytical whisper in the back of my skull. Good. Fear is a necessary tool of statecraft. I flinched. "They're on our side." I thought back, the internal dialogue feeling both alien and instinctual. "There is no side," she countered, her century of military pragmatism cutting through my nascent idealism. "There are objectives, and there are obstacles. Nothing more." Jax and Lena stayed close, flanking me like guardians. They could see the struggle in my eyes. "You need to disconnect, Kalen," Jax said, his voice low. "Whatever that cord did, you can't stay plugged in all the time. Your brain will liquefy." He was right. I reached out with my mind, finding the psychic thread that bound me to the ship and pulled. It was like tearing off a piece of my own skin. The sudden sensory deprivation was staggering. The ship's presence vanished, leaving me feeling small, deaf, and blind in a way I never had before. I was just Kalen again, a man in a worn flight suit standing in a noisy hangar, and the sudden vulnerability was terrifying. I stumbled, and Jax caught my arm, his metallic hand a solid anchor in reality. The meeting was held in what Haven called its strategy room, a repurposed mining control center where holographic projectors flickered over a table carved from raw asteroid rock.
Valerius had assembled the leaders of the 5 major resistance cells via a tight beam transmission. Their faces shimmered in the air above the table, a collection of hard-eyed, desperate people who had been fighting a losing war in the shadows for decades. Now, the shadows were gone, and they were blinded by the light. "We have a weapon of unimaginable power," Valerius began, his voice laced with a tremor of both excitement and dread. "The Harbinger is not just a ship, it is a symbol. It is the leverage we need to force the Athelians to the negotiating table. We can expose the truth of Ascension, show the galaxy the lies their peace is built on." His plan was cautious, scholarly. He wanted to win a war of information. He was immediately cut off by a new voice, a woman whose hologram was sharp and steady, her face framed by dark, severe hair. She radiated an unnerving stillness. "Negotiate, Valerius. You found a dragon, and your first thought is to teach it to write poetry." This was Soraya, leader of the Crimson Dirge, the most militant and effective of the resistance cells, operating deep within the core worlds. "The Athelians don't negotiate with errors. They correct them. They are already mobilizing. Their logic will demand an overwhelming response to neutralize the anomaly we represent. The only way to survive is to strike first, to cripple their ability to retaliate." She understands. Rostova's voice was a murmur of approval in my mind, even though I was disconnected. The echo was a part of me now, a resonance that would never truly fade. Soraya's eyes fixed on me, or rather, the space where I stood. The pilot. "Kalen, you control the weapon. You must see the logic in this. We have a list of strategic targets, Athelian command relays, fleet depots, cloning facilities. We're not butchers." "Soraya," Valerius shot back, his face flushing with anger. "If we adopt their methods, what are we fighting for? We are fighting to exist." Soraya's voice was like chipping ice, and existence is not one with moral debates. It is one by the side with the will to do what is necessary. The other cell leaders were divided, their arguments dissolving into a cacophony of fear and ambition. I stayed silent, the phantom feeling of the Harbinger's power a heavy weight in my gut. I had started this to save my sister, to get payback for the fire they'd stolen from her eyes. I hadn't signed up to be the arbiter of a galactic war, but I was. Soraya, sensing the stalemate, played her hand. "There is another target. Not a military one. It's a place they call a stasis archive, a research outpost on the moon, Cygnus X-12. It's where they hold those who are resistant to the final stages of ascension. They study them, trying to refine the process." My blood went cold. "Alara. They are cataloged as biological anomalies, not prisoners." Soraya continued, her voice softening with calculated precision. "The facility is lightly defended, a symbol of their scientific arrogance. If we were to liberate it, the psychological blow to the compact would be immense. Proof that their sacred process is flawed, that it creates not harmony, but broken minds they have to hide away. It was a trap, not a military one, but a personal one, and she knew it. She had dangled the one thing in the universe that would make me move, regardless of the cost. Valerius saw it immediately. Kalen, no, it's too risky. Her intelligence could be flawed, or worse, it could be a lure. It is a lure, Rostova confirmed. Her tactical assessment is sound, but her motives are political. She wants to force our hand, to commit us to her path of total war. But the target. The target is still valid. I looked at Valerius, then at the cold, waiting face of Soraya. He was offering a path of peace that might never come. She was offering a path of violence that promised a chance, however slim, to find my sister. There was no choice. "We're going," I said, my voice cutting through the arguments. The room fell silent. "Give me the coordinates." The flight to Cygnus X-12 was tense. I was back in the throne. The fusion of my mind with Rostova's and the ship's now more seamless, more terrifyingly natural. Jax had jury-rigged a feedback dampener, a crude device designed to give me a buffer, to keep my own consciousness from being completely subsumed. It helped, but it was like trying to muffle a hurricane with a blanket. As we tore through the rift, the space around the moon felt empty. Deceptively so. No patrols, no orbital platforms. Lena reported from her console, her fingers dancing across sensor readouts. The only energy signature is from the facility on the surface, and it's low power. Civilian grade. Arrogance or an invitation. Rostova noted, "We descended from orbit, a mountain of dark steel falling through the thin methane atmosphere of the ice moon. The facility was a small, white dome, a sterile blister on the frozen landscape, almost invisible against the snow. There was no resistance, no challenge, nothing. We landed a kilometer away, the impact of our landing struts cracking the ice for miles. I don't like this." Jax grunted over the comm. "It smells like a clean room, and nothing good ever happens in a clean room." He was right. The moment we powered down our primary thrusters, it hit us. It wasn't a weapon firing. It was a sound, a psychic chord of absolute, perfect harmony that washed over the ship. It was the antithesis of the rift's chaos, the opposite of human emotion. It was a wave of pure, weaponized serenity. On the bridge, the lights flickered. The hum of the core faltered in my head. The connection to Rostova and the Harbinger began to fray, dissolving into a roar of pleasant, empty static. The pain was excruciating, not a physical pain, but a spiritual tearing. I felt myself being ripped away from the ship, my mind being forcibly smoothed out, the rough edges of my grief and rage being sanded away into a dull, placid acceptance. Harmonizer. Rostova's voice was a faint, struggling whisper, distorted by the psychic noise. Psychic null field. They are trying to pacify us. I could feel the ship dying around me. It was a machine of rage and memory, and this weapon was force-feeding it peace. The systems were shutting down, unable to function without the chaotic, emotional pilot at their heart. I looked at my hands on the control throne, and for a terrifying second, I couldn't remember why I was angry. I saw Alara's face in my mind, smiling, serene, and empty, and a part of me, a part that was being rewritten by the harmonizer, thought it was beautiful. No, the scream was not mine. It was Rostova's. 100 years of fury, of watching her crew die, of a warrior's promise to her fallen comrades, erupted from the depths of the echo core. It was a pure, jagged note of hatred in the Athelian's perfect chord. It wasn't enough to break the field, but it was enough to give me a moment of clarity. I couldn't fight their harmony with more chaos. That's what they expected. They were trying to calm the storm, so I wouldn't be a storm. I would be the eye of it. I stopped fighting. I let the calming wave wash over me, but instead of letting it erase me, I found my own anchor. I didn't focus on my rage for the Athelians. I focused on my love for my sister, the real one, the girl with fire in her eyes. I focused on my loyalty to Jax and Lena, on the smell of ozone in the stray dog's cockpit, on the bitter taste of synth coffee in a Ganymede dive bar. I gathered every broken, messy, inefficient, illogical piece of myself, not as a weapon, but as a shield. Then I reached for Rostova's rage, not to wield it, but to hold it. I wrapped my own raw humanity around her ancient, burning fury. I didn't try to silence the Athelian's song. I began to sing my own. It was a terrible, dissonant harmony, a fusion of a soldier's vengeance and a brother's love, of a smuggler's cynicism and a dreadnought's soul. It was the sound of a paradox, of a being that was both creator and destroyer, both flesh and steel, both past and present. The effect was immediate. The perfect, serene chord of the harmonizer faltered. It was a system designed to handle one or the other logic or chaos, but it couldn't process both at once. A crack appeared in the psychic wall. The lights on the bridge flickered back to full, angry crimson. The hum of the core roared back to life, not just as a machine, but as a cheer of defiance. Outside, nestled in a hidden crater 5 kilometers away, the Athelian harmonizer projector, a crystalline spire of intricate design, began to vibrate. It couldn't resolve the equation we represented. A hairline fracture appeared on its surface. Then, with a silent, psychic scream that echoed only in my mind, it shattered into a million pieces of useless crystal the moment the field collapsed. 4 Vindicator-class cutters decloaked in orbit above us. The trap had been sprung. They had been waiting for the harmonizer to neutralize us, to turn the Harbinger into a docile prize. But the prize was awake, and it was furious. Now, Rostova and I thought as one. The fight wasn't a fight. It was an execution. We didn't even bother rising from the surface. The Harbinger's dorsal cannons, powered by a mind that now saw the Athelian ships not as targets, but as extensions of its own will, fired with impossible speed and accuracy. We tore them from the sky before they could even achieve firing solutions. They burned in the methane atmosphere, 4 falling stars that marked their failure. In the silence that followed, Lena's voice was shaky. The archive, it's empty. Kalen, the life sign readings are gone. They were never here. The energy signature we read was a decoy. Soraya. She had sent us here, knowing it was a trap. She had gambled our lives, gambled the most powerful weapon in the galaxy, to force a confrontation, to eliminate Valerius's path of negotiation. She had used my love for my sister as a weapon against my own people. I leaned back in the throne, the adrenaline of the battle draining away, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. The Athelians were the enemy I could see. They were predictable in their logic, in their serene, murderous condescension. But the true war, the one that would decide what came after, was not just against them. It was against the ghosts within our own ranks, those who had become the very monsters we sought to destroy. And I, the man bonded to a machine of vengeance, was standing right in the middle of it all. The return to Haven was a silent, grim affair. We rode the rift not with the exhilarating fury of our escape from the serpent's maw, but with the cold, heavy purpose of a funeral procession. The news of our victory at Cygnus X-12 had preceded us, but the context was missing. To the Resistance, we were heroes who had single-handedly destroyed an Athelian ambush. They saw the victory, not the betrayal that had engineered it. As the Harbinger docked, the cheers from the hangar crews felt hollow, grating. They were celebrating a battle, but I knew we had just lost a critical front in the war for our own soul. Soraya was waiting for us, her hologram projected onto the bridge, the moment we cleared the final docking clamps. Her expression was one of solemn, manufactured respect, a masterful display. "Captain," she said, the honorific feeling like a fresh insult. "You have shown the Athelians the price of their arrogance. The entire network is emboldened. I didn't rise from the throne. I let the psychic link to the Harbinger remain active." A low, predatory hum in the background of our conversation. I wanted her to feel it, to know that she wasn't speaking to just a man anymore. The archive was empty. "Soraya," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Her hologram had the grace to feign surprise. "That is unfortunate. Their deception knows no bounds. But the tactical result remains. You have proven the Harbinger is not just a weapon, but a force that can meet them on their own terms." "She is testing your control," Rustova observed, her mental voice a shard of ice. "She wants to see if you are a pilot or a passenger." "You lied," I said, cutting through her political maneuvering. "You knew it was a trap. You used my sister to point a gun at my head and force me to pull the trigger." The bridge went silent. Jax moved to stand behind the throne, his massive form a silent threat. Lena's fingers froze over her console, her eyes darting between me and the hologram. Soraya's composure didn't waver. "I presented you with an opportunity," she replied, her voice cooling to match mine. "A chance to bloody their nose and unify our cause. War requires sacrifice. Kalen, it requires leaders who can make the hard choices." Valerius and his dream of negotiation would have seen us dissected on Athelian lab tables while composing strongly worded letters of protest. "I chose to act. You chose to sacrifice her," I countered. "No," she said, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine, fervent belief shone in her eyes. "I chose to believe in you. I gambled that the weapon would be stronger than the cage they built for it, and I was right." She was good. She was turning her betrayal into a testament of faith, recasting her manipulation as a necessary catalyst for our evolution. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a politician of the highest, most dangerous order. "The network is ready," she continued, pressing her advantage. "The Crimson Dirge has secured schematics for the Athelians' primary comms nexus, the hub. It's located in the accretion disk of a black hole, defended by automated systems, all controlled by a central AI. If we destroy it, we blind them. We sever the connection between their core worlds and their expansion fleets. For days, maybe weeks, their perfect in logical order will devolve into chaos. It will be the opening we need to launch a full-scale, system-wide offensive." It was a sound military strategy. It was exactly the kind of target Rostova would have chosen a century ago. But coming from Soraya, it felt like another chain being forged around my neck. "The target is strategically vital," Rostova admitted, her pragmatism warring with her innate distrust of political operators. "Blinding an enemy is the first step to breaking its spine." Before I could answer, Valerius's face appeared on a secondary screen, his features etched with worry. "Kalen, don't listen to her. This is the path to annihilation. Attacking the hub is an act of total war. They will not see it as a strategic strike. They will see it as an existential threat. Their response will be final. They will invoke the sterilization protocols. A cold dread, deeper than any I had felt in battle, washed over me. The sterilization protocols were a myth, a horror story whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. It was the Athelians' final solution, a process where they used atmospheric nanites to rewrite the biology of a planet, rendering its native life forms extinct, quietly and efficiently, turning a world into a blank slate for colonization. It was a weapon of genocide so clean you could build a park on the graveyard. They wouldn't, Jax muttered. But the lack of conviction in his voice was telling. They wouldn't risk destroying a planet they want to control. They would if the alternative is losing control of everything. Valerius countered, his voice desperate. Soraya is forcing them into a corner where their own logic dictates our extinction. The choice was laid bare. 2 paths. 1. A bloody, violent offensive that might win us our freedom at the cost of our humanity, and, potentially, our entire species. The other, a path of cautious resistance that might preserve our morals while we were systematically pacified into oblivion. Both felt like a defeat. I looked at Soraya's cold, expectant face, then at Valerius's pleading eyes. They were both asking me to save them, to be the weapon that won their version of the war. But the Harbinger wasn't their weapon. It was mine. They both see the ship, I thought, a sudden, chilling realization dawning on me. They don't see the pilot. They think they can aim me. I cut both transmissions. The holograms vanished, leaving the bridge in the dim, crimson glow of the alert lighting. Lena, I said, my voice quiet. Cross-reference every piece of data Soraya has ever sent through the Resistance network. Look for encrypted markers, hidden sub-protocols, anything that suggests a secondary agenda. And Jax, I continued, turning my head to look at the mechanic. I need you to go deeper into the Harbinger's systems, not the tactical ones. I want you to look at the logs from a century ago, specifically Captain Rostova's personal entries. I need to know what she was fighting for, not just what she was fighting against. I disconnected from the core, the sensory whiplash hitting me harder this time. The silence in my head was a relief and a torment. For hours, the only sounds on the bridge were the soft clicks of Lena's console and Jax's occasional muttered curse as he delved into archaic, pre-compact code. I sat in the throne, feeling like a ghost haunting my own body, grappling with the impossible weight of the decision before me. Finally, Lena's head snapped up. I found it, she whispered, her face pale. It's not in her transmissions. It's in the tactical data for the hub. There's a ghost signal embedded in the targeting solution she sent us. A single, encrypted command line. She brought it up on the main screen. It was a short, elegant string of code. Protocol Cascade. I looked at her, my heart pounding. What does it do? I don't know for sure, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But based on its structure, it's designed to interface directly with the hub's core AI. It's not a command to destroy the AI. It's a command to seize control of it. Soraya didn't want to blind the Athelians. She wanted their eyes. She wanted to turn their own network, their greatest weapon of control and order, against them. She wasn't fighting for freedom. She was fighting for a new throne. At that moment, Jax's voice echoed from a comm panel. Kalen, you need to see this. He patched his findings to the main screen. It was an audio file, corrupted and laced with static, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Eva Rostova, recorded in the final hours before the Harbinger's last stand. The council has fallen. Her voice was strained, laced with the sounds of nearby explosions. They call it the Unification War. But this is tyranny. They want to burn away our identities, our flaws, our humanity, in the name of a perfect, unified whole. They believe that peace can be programmed, that men can be made into machines. There was a long pause, filled with the scream of tearing metal. I will not let my ship, my crew, become a tool for that kind of peace. We will not be their perfect, silent weapon. If this is the end, then we will end as we lived, chaotic, flawed, and free. We will be a ghost in their history, a warning, not a foundation for a new empire. The audio cut out. I sat in the silence, the captain's final words echoing in the vast, empty space of the bridge. She hadn't been fighting for victory. She had been fighting against the very idea of absolute control, whether it came from her enemies or her own side. She had chosen oblivion over becoming a symbol for a new tyrant. Soraya, Valerius. They were both repeating the same cycle Rostova had died to prevent. They saw the Harbinger as a means to an end, a tool to build their own version of a perfect galaxy. They hadn't learned the lesson she had tried to teach with her sacrifice. A new alert chimed, soft and insistent. It was a priority message, flagged from the deepest, most secure channels of the Rust Belts. It wasn't from Soraya or Valerius. It was from a network of independent rift runners, the smugglers and outlaws who answered to no one. Captain of the Harbinger. The text scrolled across the screen. Athelian fleet mobilizing from the core. Not a patrol, not a task force. They're calling it a purification fleet. And it's not heading for Haven. It's heading for a little backwater world in the Sol system, a place called Earth. My blood turned to ice. They weren't coming for the weapon. They were going for the source. They were going to invoke the sterilization protocols. They were going to erase our past, our present, and our future in one clean and silent stroke. And they were using Soraya's attack as the justification. She had given them the perfect excuse. Get us underway, I said, my voice a low growl. I slammed my hands onto the throne's controls, and this time, when I connected to the core, I didn't pull. I pushed. I opened my mind completely, letting the full, untamed consciousness of the warship and its ghost captain merge with mine. The power was blinding, ecstatic, and terrifying. They threaten our home. Rostova's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar that was indistinguishable from my own thoughts. They will learn what it means to threaten a ghost. I looked at the star chart, at the distant, vulnerable blue dot of Earth. The choice was gone. The debates were over. Soraya wanted a war. The Athelians wanted a genocide. I was going to give them both. But we wouldn't be their weapon. We wouldn't be their symbol. We would be their reckoning. The Harbinger moved through the rift not like a ship, but like an apex predator returning to its hunting grounds. The chaotic energies of space-time parted before us, less a struggle to be navigated and more an old, familiar current welcoming us home. The Sol system was no longer the quiet, curated backwater the Athelians had turned it into. It was a war zone in the making. The Purification Fleet was a breathtaking sight, a testament to the Athelians' terrifying sense of aesthetics and order. 100 ships, not the sleek, viper-like cutters we had faced before, but massive, crystalline vessels that resembled shards of ice, arranged in a perfect, concentric orbit around Earth. They weren't warships in the traditional sense. They were instruments of planetary engineering, each one armed with a single, devastating weapon, a dispersal array for the sterilization nanites. They moved with a silent, synchronized grace, a ballet of extinction. They hadn't noticed us. Our entry from the rift was too close, too fast, too chaotic for their logical sensor arrays to process in time. We emerged near the orbit of Saturn, a ghost of dark, pitted steel appearing in a realm of pristine, geometric light. For a few precious seconds, we were an anomaly, a rounding error in their perfect equation. In those seconds, the fusion of Kalen, Rostova, and the Harbinger achieved a state of perfect, terrible clarity. We were no longer three separate consciousnesses wrestling for control. We were one entity, with one purpose: the smuggler's cunning, the soldier's fury, and the dreadnought's soul had coalesced into something new, something the universe had never seen before. We saw the Athelian fleet not as 100 separate ships, but as a single, interconnected system, a network. And we knew, with an instinct born of a century of battle and a lifetime of skirting the rules, that you don't fight a network by attacking its nodes. You attack the connections between them. A message appeared on our view screen, this time not a polite request, but a cold, absolute command from the Athelian fleet's flagship, the Serene Consequence, Anomaly. Your existence is an act of discord. Cease all function. Your pattern will be corrected. They talk like gardeners pruning a hedge. Jax muttered from his station, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. Correction, Lena whispered, her eyes wide with horror as she monitored their energy signatures. That's what they call it. They have always hidden their violence behind beautiful words. Rostova's thought was a current of pure contempt. We didn't answer them with words. We answered with the weapon they had forgotten humanity possessed, the gravitational distortion projector. We reached deep into the Harbinger's core, into the place where physics was a suggestion, not a law. Power, raw and untamed, flooded the projector. The space around our ship didn't just bend, it tore. We fired not a beam, not a projectile, but a wave of pure gravitational chaos. It was a ripple in the fabric of reality, a targeted earthquake in space-time. The wave hit the Athelian fleet's perfect formation, and their synchronized dance became a symphony of destruction. Their ships, designed to fly in harmonious tandem, were thrown into violent disarray. The gravitational tethers that linked their movements snapped. Shields designed to stop energy weapons flickered and died, unable to compensate for the very laws of physics being rewritten around them. Ships collided, their crystalline hulls shattering into clouds of glittering dust. It was precise and brutal. We hadn't aimed at a single ship. We had aimed at their order, at the logic that bound them together. And without that logic, they were nothing but fragile glass in a hurricane. The Serene Consequence momentarily spared the worst of the initial wave, turned its full attention to us. It was a magnificent vessel, twice the size of any other in the fleet, a cathedral of ice and light. A new wave of energy emanated from it, not the harmonizer's placid song, but its opposite, a piercing psychic scream of pure, concentrated order designed to shatter a chaotic mind. It felt like 1,000 needles of ice stabbing into our consciousness. But we were no longer just the chaos they expected. We were the paradox. We met their scream not with a roar, but with the dissonant harmony we had forged at Cygnus X-12. We broadcast our own truth, the memory of Ilara's empty eyes, the sound of Rostova's crew dying, the quiet desperation of Haven, the cold fury of betrayal. We showed them the beautiful, terrible, illogical mess of a soul that refused to be simplified. The Athelian psychic assault faltered, confused by the signal. It was like a perfect tuning fork trying to resonate with the sound of a breaking heart. While they were reeling, we moved. The Harbinger surged forward, plasma cannons firing not in broadsides, but in pinpoint. Surgical strikes. We carved a path through the shattered remains of their formation, our movements fluid and unpredictable, a predator weaving through a panicked herd. They are evacuating their command consciousness, Rostova noted, sensing the subtle shift in the flagship's energy patterns. They are abandoning the ship, transferring their core intelligences to escape pods. I saw their escape plan in my mind's eye, the logical, predictable trajectories they would take. They would flee to their hub, to the heart of their network, and rebuild. They would learn from this anomaly and design a more perfect, more absolute correction. They would never stop. "Lena," I commanded, my voice resonating with the ship's thrumming engines. "Is Soraya's Cascade protocol uploaded?" "Yes." She confirmed, her voice tight. "It's ready." "Give it to them." It was a horrifying gamble. We were about to unleash one monster to fight another, with no guarantee of what the outcome would be. But as I looked at the blue jewel of Earth hanging in the void, I understood Rostova's final choice. Some things are worse than annihilation. Becoming the thing you fight is one of them. Soraya wanted to be a queen. The Athelians wanted to be gods. We were going to give them each other. Lena's fingers flew. A single tight beam transmission, cloaked in the chaos of the battle, shot from the Harbinger and pierced the shields of the Athelian hub. Light minutes away, the ghost signal. Soraya's ambition encoded into a weapon found its target. On the bridge of the Serene Consequence, the Athelian commanders must have felt a moment of confusion as their network, their collective external soul, began to change. It wasn't a shutdown. It was a hostile takeover. The logic was being rewritten, co-opted by a different, more brutal, more human form of tyranny. Soraya's will, cold and hungry for power, began to devour their perfect order from within. We watched as the Athelian fleet's movements became erratic. Some ships stopped firing. Others began firing on each other. Their network was having a seizure, a civil war being fought in the lines of code and psychic energy. Their greatest strength had become their ultimate vulnerability. We ceased our attack, pulling back to a silent, watchful orbit. We had planted the seed. Now, we would let the two poisons cancel each other out. This was not the clean victory Valerius had winted, nor the total conquest Soraya had dreamed of. It was something messier, something more uncertain. It was a chance. In the aftermath, as the remnants of the Purification Fleet tore themselves apart, a single, unencrypted message reached us. It came from Haven. It was Valerius. "What have you done?" His voice was filled with a terrible, dawning comprehension. "I ended the war," I replied, the words feeling heavy and true. "What comes next is up to us." We stayed in orbit for a day, a silent, scarred sentinel watching as the Athelian compact tore itself apart from the inside out. We intercepted transmissions, Soraya, now a ghost in their machine, broadcasting her manifesto of a new, stronger humanity. and the remaining Athelian purists screaming of corruption and heresy. The galaxy was no longer divided between order and chaos. It was fractured, and in those fractures, for the first time in a century, there was room to breathe. On the second day, I walked away from the throne. The disconnection was the most painful yet. A true amputation, but it was necessary. When I stood on my own 2 feet, on the bridge, I was just Kalen again, but I was not the same man who had taken the job on Ganymede. The echo of Rostova was a permanent part of me, a quiet, steady presence that was no longer a co-pilot, but a conscience. The Harbinger was silent, its core powered down to a low hum. It was no longer a weapon of war, it was a tomb again, a memorial, a warning. We left the ship in a high, stable orbit over Earth, a dark moon to remind us of the price of our freedom. Jax, Lena, and I took the stray dog. The old, ugly, beautiful freighter. And we flew away. We didn't go back to Haven. We didn't seek out Valerius or the shattered remains of the Resistance. We went into the quiet, uncharted spaces between the old compact territories, the places where the new conflicts were not yet burning. One evening, sitting in the familiar, cramped cockpit of the stray dog. Lena handed me a data slate. I found this. Sifting through the final, corrupted data streams from the Serene Consequence before their network collapsed completely. It's a manifest from the Stasis Archive on Cygnus X-12. It lists all the anomalies they were holding there. My heart stopped. I took the slate, my hands trembling. I scrolled through the list of names, my breath catching in my throat. And then I saw it. Subject 734, Alara. Status transferred. Destination unlisted deep range reclamation project. Reason unsuccessful integration. Persistent cognitive dissonance. Unsuccessful integration. The words were a revelation. They hadn't hollowed her out. She had fought them. The fire I thought they had extinguished had been burning all along, too brightly for their perfect peace to contain. They hadn't broken her. They had just hidden her away. I looked out at the endless sea of stars, at a galaxy that was now free and terrified, broken and full of possibility. The war was over, but my journey was just beginning. We had a heading. We had a hope. And for the first time in a long, long time, as I set a course for the unknown, I felt the ghost of a smile on my face. The cage was broken, and now it was time to find the fire